I never thought sorting through my father's old boxes would lead to me owning the most hated woman in Arizona paying rent. But here we are. My father, Leonard Oliver Sr., died 6 months ago from a heart attack while fishing at Lake Pleasant. We weren't close, not really. After my parents divorced when I was 12, Dad moved to Sun Valley, Arizona, a retirement community northwest of Phoenix, and I stayed in Flagstaff with Mom. We talked on holidays, maybe saw each other twice a year if we were lucky. When he died, I inherited his modest house, his truck, and about 73 boxes of paperwork that he apparently never threw away. The man kept receipts from 1987. I'm Logan Oliver, 34 years old, and I work as a civil engineer in Flagstaff. My life was ordinary, maybe even boring. I had a good job, a decent apartment, and a girlfriend who left me because I apparently cared more about structural integrity than emotional availability. She wasn't wrong, but nothing prepared me for what I found in box number 47 on a rainy Saturday afternoon in March. The box was labeled Legal Stuff 1995-2000 in my father's chicken scratch handwriting. Inside were copies of his divorce papers, some old tax returns, and a folder marked Sun Valley Properties. I almost skipped it. Almost. But something made me open that folder, and inside was a deed. Not just any deed, but a warranty deed dated August 12, 1998, transferring ownership of Lot 47, Section 12, Sun Valley Planned Community to Leonard Oliver Sr. The property description meant nothing to me until I saw the attached survey map. The lot was the land beneath the Sun Valley Homeowners Association clubhouse. I sat there on my father's dusty floor, staring at this piece of paper like it was written in a foreign language. The clubhouse was the crown jewel of Sun Valley, a sprawling 10,000-square-foot building with a pool, fitness center, event halls, and offices where the HOA board ruled their little kingdom with iron fists. And according to this deed, my father owned the land it sat on. My first thought was that this had to be a mistake. My second thought was to call a lawyer. I contacted Mitchell Garrett, a real estate attorney in Phoenix who came highly recommended. Mitchell was in his 50s, with the kind of calm demeanor that made you trust him immediately. I drove down to Phoenix the following Tuesday, deed in hand, along with every other document from that folder. Mitchell examined the papers for what felt like an hour while I sat in his leather chair, drinking terrible coffee and trying not to think about my father keeping this secret for over 25 years. "This is legitimate," Mitchell finally said, looking up at me over his reading glasses. "Your father purchased this land from the original developer, Marcus Chen, in 1998. According to the deed, it's a fee simple absolute ownership. That means he owned the land outright, no restrictions." "But there's a massive clubhouse on it," I said. "How is that possible?" Mitchell flipped through more papers. "Did your father ever mention any lease agreements, any rental arrangements?" "He never mentioned this at all. We weren't that close after the divorce." "Well, there should be a lease agreement somewhere if the HOA has been using this land. They can't just build on someone else's property without permission. Let me do some research. I'll need a few days." Those few days turned into a week, and then Mitchell called me with news that made my head spin. "Logan, I've searched every database I can access. There's no lease agreement on record. No easement, no right-of-way, nothing." I contacted the Sun Valley HOA management company and requested any documents they have regarding the clubhouse property. They sent over their articles of incorporation bylaws and a deed that they claim gives them ownership of the clubhouse and the land. So they own it. My heart sank. No, their deed is for the clubhouse structure only. It was filed in 2001, 3 years after your father bought the land. The developer sold them the building but not the land underneath. I think someone at the HOA either doesn't know this or has been hoping no one would notice. What does that mean for me? Mitchell leaned back in his chair. I could hear it creak over the phone. It means you own land that's currently being occupied by a structure you don't own. The HOA is technically trespassing. You have several options here. You could demand they remove the building, you could sell them the land, or you could lease it to them. And if they refuse, then you go to court, and based on what I'm seeing here, you'll win. But Logan, I have to warn you, HOAs can be vicious, especially when money and power are involved. This won't be easy. I thought about my father, about his quiet life in Sun Valley, about how he never mentioned any of this. Why did he buy this land? Why did he keep it secret? The questions gnawed at me, but he wasn't around to answer them anymore. Let's reach out to them, I said. Professional, polite, maybe we can work something out without lawyers getting too involved. Mitchell laughed. Logan, I am a lawyer. But I understand what you mean. I'll draft a letter. The letter went out on April 3rd, addressed to the Sun Valley HOA Board of Directors. It was professional and straightforward. It explained that I was the legal owner of the land beneath their clubhouse, provided copies of the deed and supporting documents, and requested a meeting to discuss terms for a lease agreement. Mitchell suggested a monthly lease of $5,000, which he said was actually below market value for commercial property of that size in that area. I expected a phone call, maybe an email. What I got was nothing. 2 weeks of absolute silence. They're hoping you'll go away, Mitchell said when I called him, frustrated. Or they're consulting their own lawyers. Give it another week. On April 22nd, I drove down to Sun Valley myself. The community was exactly as I remembered from my few visits to see Dad. Neat rows of beige and tan houses, perfectly manicured lawns, palm trees lining the streets. The clubhouse sat in the center of the development like a monument to suburban achievement. I parked in the visitor lot and walked inside. The lobby was all tile and fake plants, with a front desk where a young guy in a polo shirt was typing on a computer. He looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Welcome to Sun Valley. Are you here for a tour? I'm here to speak with someone from the HOA board. My name is Logan Oliver. The smile vanished. Do you have an appointment? No, but I sent a letter 3 weeks ago and haven't received a response. I'd like to discuss property matters. The board is very busy. You'll need to schedule. I own the land this building is sitting on. I said it quietly, but the kid's face went pale. I'll see if anyone's available. Please wait here. He disappeared through a door behind the desk. I stood there, looking at the bulletin board covered in announcements about pool rules and upcoming bingo nights. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I was about to leave when a woman emerged from the back office. She was exactly what you'd picture when someone says, HOA president. Mid-50s, blonde hair in that specific suburban style that required way too much hairspray, wearing a white blouse and khaki pants like she was about to lead a safari through Costco. Her name tag said Patricia Morrison, HOA president. Mr. Oliver, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. What a surprise. We received your little letter. Then you know why I'm here. I know you're making some very serious claims based on paperwork that's over 25 years old. Our legal team is reviewing the matter. Your legal team should tell you that my deed is legitimate and recorded. I own this land. I'm not looking to cause problems. I just want to formalize a lease agreement. Patricia's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. This clubhouse has been the heart of our community for decades. Thousands of homeowners depend on it. You can't just show up and demand rent. I'm not demanding anything. I'm offering a reasonable lease. $5,000 a month is below market value. Below market value. Her voice rose, and several people in the lobby turned to look. "This is extortion. You're trying to take advantage of this community. I'm trying to get compensated for property I own that you're using without permission. That's not extortion. That's how property rights work." Patricia stepped closer, her eyes narrowed. "Your father never asked us for a dime. He was a good man who understood community values. My father kept this quiet for reasons I don't understand, but I'm not my father. I have every legal right to. You have no idea what you're dealing with," she hissed. "This community will fight you. We have resources, we have lawyers, and we have 700 homeowners who vote. You're nobody." I felt my temper rising but kept my voice level. "I'll see you in court then." I turned and walked out before I said something I'd regret. My hands were shaking as I got into my truck. Mitchell was right. This was going to be ugly. Mitchell filed a quiet title action on May 1st. It's a legal proceeding that establishes ownership of real property, and in our case, it would force the HOA to either prove they had rights to the land or acknowledge that they didn't. We also filed for injunctive relief and back rent. If they'd been using my father's land without permission since 1998, that was over 25 years of unpaid rent. The HOA responded with a fury I didn't think was possible. Their lawyers filed a motion to dismiss, claiming the deed was fraudulent. When that failed, they claimed adverse possession, arguing that because they'd used the land openly for over 10 years, they now owned it. Mitchell shut that down too. Adverse possession requires that the use be hostile and without the owner's permission, and he argued that my father's silence could have been implied permission, which defeated their claim. By June, the legal bills were piling up, and I was starting to regret this entire thing. I wasn't rich. My savings were decent, but lawyer fees were eating through them fast. Mitchell offered to work on contingency, taking a percentage of whatever settlement we got, and I accepted gratefully. Then Patricia escalated things. I started getting letters at my Flagstaff address. Not legal letters, but personal ones. Anonymous notes telling me I was destroying a community, that I was greedy, that my father would be ashamed. Someone slashed my tires in my apartment parking lot. I couldn't prove it was connected, but the timing was suspicious. The worst part was what they did to my father's memory. Patricia organized a community meeting in July and invited local news. She stood at a podium, tears in her eyes, and talked about how Leonard Oliver Sr. had been a beloved member of Sun Valley, how he'd volunteered at community events and made friends with everyone. Then she talked about his greedy son who was trying to rob the community blind. I watched the news coverage from my apartment, feeling sick. They interviewed homeowners who talked about how much they loved the clubhouse, how it was where they celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, how losing it would destroy their home values. Not one mentioned that I'd offered a reasonable lease. Not one mentioned that they'd built on land they didn't own. Mitchell called me after the broadcast. "Don't read the comments online, trust me." I read them anyway. Big mistake. The preliminary hearing was set for August 15th at the Maricopa County Superior Court. I drove down to Phoenix the night before and stayed in a cheap hotel that smelled like disinfectant and regret. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my father, wondering why he'd bought that land, why he'd never said anything. Had he planned to do something with it? Had he forgotten? The questions were endless and unanswerable. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Judge Harriet Brennan presided. A woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen every legal trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. The HOA brought 3 lawyers. Mitchell and I sat at our table, just the two of us, and I felt seriously outgunned. Patricia sat in the gallery, surrounded by at least 50 Sun Valley residents who'd driven up for moral support. They all wore matching blue shirts that said, "Save our clubhouse." It was quite a production. The HOA's lead attorney, a guy named Richard Strauss who looked like he charged $1,000 an hour just to answer his phone, argued that my father's deed was problematic because the original developer, Marcus Chen, hadn't properly owned the land when he sold it. It was creative but ultimately baseless. Mitchell had tracked down the chain of title going back to the 1960s when Sun Valley was first developed. Everything was legitimate. Judge Brennan listened to both sides, reviewed the documents, and then did something that made my heart stop. She asked me directly, "Mr. Oliver, what is your end goal here? Do you want these people to tear down their clubhouse?" I stood up, not sure if I was supposed to. "No, Your Honor, I just want fair compensation for the use of my property. I've offered a lease at below market rates. They've refused to negotiate. And if they can't afford your lease terms, then we negotiate different terms. I'm not trying to destroy anything. I just want what's legally mine." Patricia shot to her feet. "Your Honor, he's trying to extort. Sit down, miss." "Morrison," Judge Brennan said sharply, "you'll have your chance to speak." Patricia sat, her face red. The judge looked at the HOA's lawyers. "Do you have any evidence that your client has legal rights to this land?" Richard Strauss shuffled papers. "Your Honor, we believe that the long-term use of the property combined with—" "That's not what I asked. Do you have a deed, a lease, an easement, anything that gives your client legal rights to use Mr. Oliver's land?" The silence that followed was beautiful. "No, Your Honor," Strauss finally admitted. Judge Brennan closed the file in front of her. "Then this is pretty straightforward. Mr. Oliver owns the land. The HOA does not. They've been using his property without permission or compensation. I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiff. The HOA will negotiate a lease agreement with Mr. Oliver within 30 days or vacate the property." The courtroom erupted. People were shouting. Patricia was crying actual tears, and the bailiff had to call for order 3 times. I just sat there, stunned. We'd won. But winning, I was about to learn, was just the beginning of the nightmare. The local news picked up the story immediately. "Man forces HOA to pay rent for own clubhouse" was the headline, and it made me sound like a villain. My phone started ringing constantly with reporters wanting interviews. I declined all of them. Mitchell advised me to keep quiet until the lease was finalized. The HOA requested a meeting for August 30th. Mitchell and I drove down to Sun Valley and met them in a conference room at the clubhouse, sitting on furniture that was technically on my land. Patricia was there with Richard Strauss and 2 other board members, a man named Gary Henderson who looked like he wanted to punch me, and a woman named Susan Clark who wouldn't make eye contact. "Let's be clear," Patricia started. "This community cannot afford $5,000 a month. We have a fixed budget based on HOA fees, and we're not raising them." "Then what can you afford?" Mitchell asked. "Nothing. We're offering nothing because we're filing an appeal." Mitchell didn't blink. "Your appeal will fail. Judge Brennan's ruling is based on clear property law. You'll waste money on lawyer fees and still owe my client rent. Be reasonable." Gary Henderson leaned forward. "Reasonable? Your client is trying to bankrupt us. Do you know what happens if we have to shut down this clubhouse? Property values tank. People lose their investments. You're destroying lives. You built on land you didn't own," I said, finally speaking up. "That's not my fault." "Your father never complained," Patricia shouted. "Maybe he should have," I shot back. "Look, I didn't create this situation, but I'm being fair. $5,000 a month for a property this size is cheap. You're using it for commercial purposes, hosting events, charging fees. You can afford this." Susan Clark finally spoke, her voice quiet. Could we do a payment plan for back rent? If we owe you for 25 years of use, that's a lot. Mitchell glanced at me. We hadn't pushed hard on back rent in court because Judge Brennan had focused on the immediate issue of ownership. But Susan was right. 25 years at $5,000 a month was $1.5 million. I'm willing to waive back rent, I said, and Mitchell's head whipped toward me. But only if we agree to a lease now. $5,000 a month, 5-year term, and you acknowledge my ownership in writing. Patricia looked like she wanted to explode. We need time to discuss this with the homeowners. They'll have to vote on a special assessment to cover the costs. You have until September 30th, Mitchell said. After that, we enforce the court's order and you vacate. We left them there, arguing among themselves. September was the longest month of my life. I went back to work in Flagstaff, trying to focus on bridge inspections and drainage systems while my phone blew up with angry calls from Sun Valley residents. Someone found my work, email, and I received hundreds of messages calling me every name in the book. The worst was a woman named Helen, who left me a 15-minute voicemail about how her husband had died, and the clubhouse was where they'd celebrated their 50th anniversary, and I was spitting on his grave by doing this. I felt awful, but what was I supposed to do? Give away property worth potentially millions just because people had feelings about it? Mitchell kept me updated on the behind-the-scenes drama. The HOA held 3 emergency meetings. They hired a property appraiser who confirmed that $5,000 a month was actually a fair rate. They consulted with 2 more law firms who both told them the same thing. They had no legal leg to stand on. Patricia tried one more tactic. She started a GoFundMe to save the clubhouse from the greedy landlord. It raised $37,000 before GoFundMe shut it down for violating their terms of service about misrepresenting legal situations. She'd claimed I was trying to evict seniors from their homes, which was completely false. On September 28th, 2 days before the deadline, Richard Strauss called Mitchell. The HOA board had voted to accept the lease terms. They would be implementing a special assessment of $60 per household per month to cover the rent. It would be controversial, but it was better than losing the clubhouse entirely. The lease signing was scheduled for October 5th. I drove down to Phoenix, and we met at Mitchell's office instead of Sun Valley. I didn't feel like dealing with an angry mob. Patricia showed up with Richard, but Susan Clark and Gary Henderson were absent. She signed the lease with the kind of fury that almost tore the paper, and then we both signed. It was done. $5,000 a month would hit my bank account on the 1st of every month going forward. Mitchell took his cut, the IRS would take theirs, but even after that, I was looking at enough money to change my life. "Congratulations," Mitchell said after Patricia stormed out. "You're officially a landlord." I should have felt happy. I'd won. But I just felt tired and sad and confused about why my father had put me in this position. October passed quietly. The first payment arrived on November 1st, right on time. I used some of it to pay off my credit cards and buy a new truck. The rest went into savings. I started thinking about what to do with the money long term. Maybe invest in real estate, ironic as that was. Then I got a call from Susan Clark. "Mr. Oliver, this is Susan from the Sun Valley HOA board. I hope it's okay that I'm calling you directly." "It's fine. What's up?" "I wanted to explain something about your father. I don't know if anyone told you, but Leonard and I were friends. We played cards together every Wednesday for years." My throat tightened. I didn't know that. He was a good man. Quiet, kept to himself mostly, but kind. One night, about 5 years ago, we were playing gin rummy and he'd had a few beers. He told me about the land, about how he'd bought it as an investment and then the HOA built the clubhouse without proper permits or checking the deed. He could have stopped them during construction, but he didn't. Why not? He said the community needed it. Sun Valley was new back then, and the clubhouse was going to be the thing that brought people together. He didn't want to be the guy who ruined that. But he also said that if anything ever happened to him, whoever inherited the deed should make sure the HOA paid their fair share. He didn't trust Patricia, said she ran the board like her personal kingdom. He wanted insurance, I guess, a way to keep them honest. I sat down on my couch, processing this. He planned this, in a way. He told me he'd put all the paperwork somewhere safe and that his son would find it eventually. I think he hoped it would never come to this, that the board would be reasonable when you approach them. But Patricia being Patricia, she had to make it a war. Why didn't you tell me this before? I wasn't on the board until this year. By the time I understood what was happening, you were already in court, and honestly, I was scared. Patricia can be vindictive. But after watching how this all played out, I felt like you deserved to know. Your father wasn't trying to burden you. He was trying to protect the community in his own way. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, looking at the framed photo of my dad that I'd kept from his house. He was smiling, holding up a fish he'd caught, wearing a ridiculous hat. I'd been angry at him for months, angry that he'd kept secrets, angry that he'd left me to deal with this mess. But maybe he'd actually given me a gift. Not just the money, but a reason to understand him better. November and December passed. The rent payments arrived on schedule. I drove down to Sun Valley a few times to check on the property, which was my legal right as the landowner. Patricia made herself scarce, but other residents slowly started warming up to me. A few even apologized for the hateful messages. Most just ignored me, which was fine. I used some of the rent money to set up a scholarship fund in my father's name at the community college where he'd taken classes after retiring. It felt like the right thing to do. In January, almost a year after I'd first opened that box and found the deed, I got another call from Susan Clark. "Logan, we have a situation. Patricia has been arrested." "What? For what?" "Embezzlement. Apparently, she's been skimming money from the HOA accounts for 3 years. The special assessment for your rent made the board do a full audit and they found a lot of irregularities. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. The police are involved now." I didn't know what to say. "Does this affect the lease?" "No, the lease is fine. We have the money, and honestly, most homeowners are over their initial anger. They understand you were in the right, but I wanted you to know. And I wanted to thank you, actually. If you hadn't forced that audit with the new expenses, we might never have found out what Patricia was doing." After the call ended, I looked up the news. Sure enough, Patricia Morrison had been arrested by the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office on multiple counts of theft and fraud. The HOA was pressing charges, and it looked like she'd be facing serious prison time. Apparently, she'd been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, luxury vacations, even a second car. The irony of her calling me greedy wasn't lost on anyone. Gary Henderson took over as interim president, and in February, the HOA held new elections. Susan Clark won by a landslide. One of her first acts was to send me a formal letter thanking me for my patience during the transition and confirming that all future rent payments would be on time. It was March again, a full year since I'd found the deed, when I drove down to Sun Valley for the anniversary of my father's death. I visited his grave at the cemetery, a simple stone marker under a tree. I told him about everything that had happened, about Patricia's arrest, about the scholarship fund, about how his plan had actually worked in a weird way. "You could have just told me," I said to the headstone. "Would have saved me a lot of stress." But I understood why he didn't. Some lessons you have to learn yourself. I stopped by the clubhouse on my way out of town. There was a community event happening, some kind of spring festival. Kids were running around, people were eating hot dogs, and a band was playing cover songs that were almost recognizable. The clubhouse was full of life and noise and community. Susan saw me and waved me over. "Logan, I'm glad you stopped by. Come on, have a hot dog." "You're paying for the venue after all." I laughed and joined her. We stood there watching people have fun, and for the first time I felt okay about all of this. "Your dad would be proud," Susan said quietly. "He loved this place, loved seeing people come together. And he'd be proud that you didn't let Patricia push you around. You think, I know. Leonard talked about you sometimes. Said you were stubborn, got that from him. Said you were good at figuring things out. He was right on both counts." The rent payments continued like clockwork. By the end of the year, I'd saved enough to make a down payment on a house in Flagstaff. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I kept working as an engineer because I liked the work, but the extra income meant I didn't have to stress about money anymore. I could take vacations, help out my mom when she needed it, even start dating again. The woman I eventually started seeing, Hannah, thought the whole HOA story was hilarious. She was a teacher who dealt with her own share of difficult parents and administrators, so she got it. We'd joke about starting our own rental empire, buying up land under other HOAs and making them pay. We never actually did it, but it was fun to imagine. 2 years after the initial court case, Richard Strauss, the HOA's former lawyer, reached out to Mitchell with an unusual request. He was representing a different HOA in Scottsdale that had a similar situation, and he wanted to know if I'd be willing to consult. Apparently, word had spread in legal circles about the Sun Valley case, and I'd become some kind of accidental expert on HOA land disputes. I declined politely. Once was enough. Patricia Morrison eventually pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts and was sentenced to 8 years in prison. The HOA recovered about 60% of what she'd stolen through asset seizures and restitution payments. The rest was gone, spent on a lifestyle she couldn't afford on her actual income. The case made national news briefly, one of those feel-good stories about corruption being exposed, though I'm not sure anyone involved felt particularly good about it. Sun Valley itself moved on. The special assessment for my rent became just another line item in the budget. New homeowners moved in who had no idea about the legal battle. The clubhouse continued hosting events, and life went on. I kept visiting my father's grave once a year, updating him on how things were going. In a strange way, the whole experience made me feel closer to him than I had in the years before his death. I understood him better now. He'd been a quiet man who liked to solve problems in unconventional ways. He'd seen an injustice, the HOA using land they didn't pay for, and he'd set up a solution that would only activate when he wasn't around to deal with the social fallout. It was kind of brilliant, actually. On what would have been his 75th birthday, I drove down to Sun Valley and donated a bench to the community in his name. It sits outside the clubhouse, under a tree, with a plaque that reads in memory of Logan Oliver Sr., friend and neighbor. Susan helped me arrange it, and we had a small ceremony where some of his old card-playing buddies said a few words. Nobody mentioned the legal battle. Nobody talked about rent or leases or property rights. They just remembered a man who liked fishing and cards and terrible jokes. It was perfect. The monthly payments continue to this day. Mitchell helped me set up a trust to manage the money properly, and I've been reinvesting most of it. If I'm smart about it, this one piece of land my father bought on a whim in 1998 will set up my future kids for college someday. But more than the money, what I got from that box of old paperwork was a final gift from my father. He taught me that standing up for what's right isn't always popular, that legal doesn't always mean fair, but fair usually means legal, and that sometimes the best revenge is just asking people to pay their bills. The lease is set to renew next year. Susan already told me they'll be signing without any drama. The community is stable, the clubhouse is thriving, and everyone has moved on from the chaos of those first few months. Every time that direct deposit hits my account on the first of the month, I think about my father sitting in his house in Sun Valley, keeping that deed safe in a box, trusting that I'd figure out what to do with it. He knew me better than I thought. He knew I wouldn't back down, wouldn't let Patricia Morrison bully me into giving up something that was legally mine. And he knew that in fighting for that land, I'd learned something about him, about myself, and about the weird, complicated way that property rights and community values sometimes clash and sometimes align. I never became close with the Sun Valley community the way he was. I'm still the guy who made them pay rent for their own clubhouse, and that's okay. But I'm also the guy who waived $1.5 million in back rent, who set up a scholarship in his father's memory, and who ultimately helped expose a thief who'd been stealing from them for years. Life is funny that way. Hannah and I got engaged last month. We're planning a small wedding in Flagstaff this summer. I thought about renting the Sun Valley Clubhouse for it as a joke, but she vetoed that idea immediately, probably for the best. My mom laughed herself sick when I told her the whole story. She said it was exactly the kind of sneaky thing Leonard would do, and she wished she'd thought of it first. They'd been divorced for over 20 years, but she still knew him better than anyone. "Your father was always playing chess while everyone else played checkers," she told me. "Drove me crazy when we were married, but I respected it." I think about that sometimes. About how my father saw this situation developing in the late 90s, saw the HOA building on his land without permission, and instead of stopping them or demanding immediate payment, he just kept the deed safe and waited. Waited for what? I'm not entirely sure. Maybe he thought they'd figure it out on their own. Maybe he wanted to avoid the confrontation. Or maybe he just liked knowing he had that ace up his sleeve if he ever needed it. Whatever his reasons, it worked out. Not smoothly, not easily, but it worked out. The Sun Valley HOA has been the best tenant I could ask for, ironically. They pay on time, they maintain the property beautifully, and they never call me with complaints. Susan Clark runs the board with actual integrity, implementing transparent accounting practices and regular audits. The homeowners vote on major decisions, instead of having one person rule by decree. In a weird way, Patricia Morrison's tyranny ending up being the best thing that could have happened to that community. Her arrest shook everyone awake, made them realize they needed to pay attention to how their HOA was run. My lawsuit was just the catalyst that forced the audit that exposed her crimes. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd never found that deed. Would Patricia have kept stealing until there was nothing left? Would the HOA have collapsed under the weight of her corruption? There's no way to know, but I like to think my father had a sense that things weren't right, that his careful documentation might someday matter. Last week, I got a letter from a law student at Arizona State University. She was writing a paper on property rights disputes and wanted to interview me about the case. I agreed, and we met at a coffee shop in Phoenix. She was sharp and curious, asking questions about adverse possession and property law that made me wish I'd paid more attention in the business law class I took in college. "What advice would you give someone who finds themselves in a similar situation?" she asked. I thought about it. Get a good lawyer. Don't back down if you know you're right, but also be willing to compromise on the things that don't matter. I could have demanded back rent and probably gotten it eventually, but it would have bankrupted the HOA and hurt a lot of innocent people. The land was worth more to me as a long-term rental than as a one-time payoff. You regret how it went down, the conflict, the publicity? Sometimes. But I think it was inevitable. Patricia wasn't going to negotiate reasonably, no matter how polite I was. And honestly, the conflict exposed her crimes, so maybe it needed to happen that way. The interview lasted 2 hours. When it was over, she thanked me and said I'd given her great material for her paper. I drove back to Flagstaff feeling oddly validated, like the whole experience had actually mattered beyond just my bank account. Hannah and I are looking at houses now, bigger places that might fit a future family. The rental income from the Sun Valley land means we can afford something nice, maybe with a big yard and a workshop where I can mess around with woodworking projects. My father would probably get a kick out of knowing that his random land purchase in the 90s set his son up for a comfortable life. I like to think he planned it that way, but truthfully, he probably just saw a good deal and took it. The fact that it worked out so well was probably 50% planning and 50% luck. Either way, I'm grateful. Grateful for the land, grateful for the lesson in standing up for myself, and grateful for the strange final connection I got with a father I never quite understood while he was alive. The sun is setting over Flagstaff as I write this, the San Francisco peaks glowing orange in the distance. Tomorrow I'll go to work, check some blueprints, approve some drainage plans, live my normal life. But on the 1st of next month, $5,000 will appear in my account. Payment for land my father bought 28 years ago from a developer who probably never imagined the legal mess he was creating. That land sits 100 miles south of here, underneath a clubhouse full of people who once hated me but now mostly just tolerate me. They're probably having bingo night right now, or a pool party, or one of the countless events that make Sun Valley the community it is. And somewhere, I hope my father is smiling, proud that his son figured out the game he'd set in motion all those years ago. Proud that I stood my ground against Patricia Morrison and her bullying tactics. Proud that I got paid. Life is strange. You never know what you're going to find in a box of old paperwork. But sometimes, if you're lucky, you find exactly what you need exactly when you need it. That's what my father gave me. Not just land or money, but a final lesson wrapped in a deed dated August 12, 1998. And every month on the 1st, I remember that lesson and smile. The lease payments continue. The clubhouse thrives. Patricia Morrison sits in prison. Susan Clark runs a transparent, honest HOA board. The homeowners of Sun Valley live their lives, mostly unaware of the legal intricacies that govern the ground beneath their favorite building. And I, Logan Oliver, son of Leonard Oliver Sr., collect my rent and live my life, forever connected to a community I never planned to be part of, all because my father saw an opportunity and took it, trusting that someday, somehow, it would all work out. He was right. 3 years have passed since I found that deed, and I can honestly say it changed my life in ways I never expected. Not just financially, though that part is nice, but it taught me something about patience, about strategy, about how sometimes the quiet moves are the ones that matter most. My father was never a loud man. He didn't make grand gestures or big speeches, but he bought a piece of land, kept the paperwork safe, and trusted that justice would eventually prevail. And it did. The Sun Valley HOA pays their rent every month on time without complaint. The clubhouse hosts events and brings people together. Susan Clark runs the board with integrity. The community is healthier for having gone through the fire of that legal battle and Patricia's arrest. And I have a future I never could have imagined, built on a foundation my father laid without ever telling me it existed. That's legacy, I think. Not what you say or what you promise, but what you leave behind for the people you love to discover on their own. Thank you, Dad. For the land, for the lesson, and for trusting me to do the right thing even when it wasn't easy. The first of the month will come again soon, and with it, another payment. Another reminder of the strange, wonderful, frustrating gift my father left me in a box labeled legal stuff. I wouldn't trade it for anything.